Last time we watched SpaceX catch a rocket out of the sky. Today we follow the money, because the real revolution isn't the fireworks, it's the economics. Reusing rockets quietly rewrote the price of reaching space, and that single number is reshaping the future. So how does flying the same rocket twice change the world? And why might this messy, billionaire-fueled space race actually be one of the best things happening right now? By the end, you'll read the space economy like a balance sheet and know exactly what to watch. This matters because the cost to reach orbit is the toll booth on everything in space. Lower that toll, and a flood of things become possible that were simply too expensive before. And that toll just dropped further and faster than almost anyone predicted it would. Satellites for internet, weather, farming, and disaster response. Science we couldn't afford. Whole new industries. The price of a single launch quietly decides which of those actually happen, and which stay science fiction. Follow this one number, and you're watching the future get decided. Start with the old way, because it really was insane. For 60 years, we built towering, complex rockets, flew them exactly once, and dropped them in the ocean. Imagine buying a jumbo jet, flying it across the Atlantic a single time, and then scrapping the whole thing. Every launch threw away tens of millions of dollars of hand-built hardware, engines, tanks, computers, gone in a few minutes. The rocket was by far the most expensive part of the trip, and it was treated as completely disposable. No wonder reaching orbit cost a fortune. The number that captures all of it is dollars per kilogram to orbit, what it costs to lift 1 kilogram of anything into space. For decades, that number sat in the tens of thousands of dollars. At that price, space stays a tiny club for governments and giant corporations. Now, the shift. If the rocket comes back and flies again, the entire math flips. Instead of buying a brand new rocket every single time, you pay for it once and spread that cost across many flights. Suddenly, that giant upfront price gets divided again and again and again. What's left for each flight is the cheap part: fuel, inspection, and refurbishment. And fuel, even for a giant rocket, is a surprisingly small slice of the cost. So once the rocket itself is paid off, each extra launch starts to look less like building a rocket and more like gassing up a truck. It's simply the airline model. A plane is enormously expensive, but you don't rebuild it after every trip. You refuel it, inspect it, and fly it again hundreds of times. Spread across all those flights, your ticket becomes affordable. Reusable rockets are spaceflight finally discovering that idea. So how far has the price actually dropped? From the tens of thousands of dollars per kilogram of the old days, reusable rockets have pushed it down toward a few thousand, and the next generation is aiming for a fraction of that again. The line on the graph is plunging. And a falling cost isn't just a discount, it's a door swinging open. Every time the price drops past a certain threshold, a whole new set of customers who could never dream of affording space suddenly can. Cheap enough, and demand doesn't just grow, it detonates. But here's the question that trips people up. Who is actually paying for all of these launches? Because rockets only get cheaper if they fly a lot, and someone has to buy all those flights. The answer is a clever mix, and one piece of it is the secret engine. First, governments. Space agencies like NASA used to build their own rockets from scratch. Now they increasingly just buy rides, like booking a flight. That quietly turns them from expensive rocket builders into paying customers and hands the new companies a steady, dependable paycheck. Second, commercial satellites. Companies that need eyes, internet, or sensors up in orbit and will pay good money to get them there. Every communications and imaging satellite is another paying passenger, helping spread the cost of the rocket across more and more flights. And third, here's the clever part. The single biggest customer for SpaceX's rockets is SpaceX itself. By launching its own giant constellation of internet satellites, it manufactured a massive built-in reason to fly constantly. It became, quite literally, its own best customer. That's the trick that makes the whole thing spin. Internal demand keeps the rockets flying often. Flying often drives the cost down. Lower cost wins more outside customers. More customers means even more flights. Round and round it goes. Engineers call it a flywheel. It's the very same magic that made cars and phones cheap. Build one of anything and it costs a fortune. Build thousands, and the price per unit quietly collapses. Reusable rockets, flying constantly, finally drag mass production economics all the way up into space. And once launch is cheap and frequent, you start to think completely differently. Instead of one giant, perfect, billion-dollar satellite, you can loft swarms of cheap small ones. Cheap access doesn't just lower the price, it changes what you even bother to try to build. Now the part that makes it all move fast: competition. For decades, a handful of state programs had the field entirely to themselves, with very little reason to cut costs. Then private companies proved reuse actually worked, and suddenly everyone had to chase the same prize. Today, it's a genuine race. SpaceX is out front, but Blue Origin, Rocket Lab, and others are pushing hard, plus national programs in China, Europe, and India all racing to build their own reusable rockets. Nobody wants to be the one left paying the old prices. And competition is the thing that quietly protects you, the customer. One company all alone can charge whatever it likes. Several companies fighting over every launch have to keep cutting prices and improving. The race itself is what keeps dragging the cost of space relentlessly downward. Which brings us to the big claim. This messy, loud, billionaire-flavored space race is, on balance, genuinely good for the future. Not perfect, we'll get to the warts in a minute, but good. So here's the case for it, made point by point. First, it democratizes space. When launch cost a fortune, only superpowers got to play. Now universities, small countries, startups, and lone researchers can afford to put something in orbit. Space is slowly turning from an exclusive members club into something closer to public infrastructure. Second, science. Cheap, frequent launch means more telescopes, more probes, and more Earth-watching satellites tracking climate, weather, and disasters as they unfold. Research that used to be flatly unaffordable becomes routine. We get to learn more about our planet and our universe, faster and cheaper. Third, spillover. The race pours money into engines, materials, software, and manufacturing, and that hard-won know-how leaks out into the wider economy. New jobs, new companies, new tools. Big competitive pushes have a long habit of lifting far more than just their original target. Fourth, it breaks the old monopoly. For most of the space age, a couple of governments alone controlled who got to orbit at all. Spreading that capability across many players and many nations makes the whole system more resilient and a lot less dependent on any single gatekeeper. And fifth, the soft stuff that's easy to mock but genuinely real, it makes space feel possible again. A generation that grows up watching rockets land is a generation that believes hard problems can actually be solved. That kind of optimism is worth something, and it's contagious. But this would be a sales pitch, not an explanation, if we just stopped there. So here are the honest warts, because cheering the good parts doesn't mean waving away the risks. And with something this powerful, there are very real ones. First, the irony. The very same competition could collapse back into a new monopoly. If one company gets so far ahead that it flies most of the world's payloads, we've simply swapped a government gatekeeper for a private one, with its own prices and its own agenda. Second, debris. Cheap launch means far more stuff crammed into orbit, and space up there is already getting crowded. Dead satellites and fragments whip around at bullet speeds. Pile up too much junk, and the most useful orbits could become a minefield we struggle to use at all. Third, it is not all telescopes and internet. Cheap, capable access to space is also raw military power, and every major nation on Earth knows it. The same rockets that lift science can lift weapons and spy satellites. The race has a hard edge we shouldn't pretend isn't there. And fourth, fragility. So much of this rides on just a few companies and a few outsized personalities. When that much of humanity's access to space hangs on one founder's decisions or one company's health, that is a single point of failure genuinely worth being nervous about. None of these warts kill the case. They are the price of admission to a genuinely transformative shift. The things we have to manage, regulate, and watch closely, precisely because the upside is so enormous. Good, with our eyes wide open. That's the honest verdict here. So how should you actually follow all of this going forward? Forget the hype and the rocket explosions for just a second and watch three numbers. Together, they'll tell you more about where space is truly heading than any breathless headline ever will. First, cost per kilogram to orbit. This is the master number, the price at the toll booth. Every single time it drops, the door to space swings wider. So when you hear a flashy new rocket announced, ask just one thing: does it actually push this number down? Second, launch cadence, how often they genuinely fly. A cheap rocket that almost never launches changes very little. The real magic is in flying constantly, because that's what spins the flywheel and proves that reuse truly works. Frequency, not flash, is the real scoreboard. And third, how many serious competitors are actually in the race? One dominant player is fragile and tends to get lazy. A healthy crowd of hungry rivals keeps prices honest and the whole field resilient. Root for the race to stay crowded, that's what keeps it working for all of us. Put those three together, and a simple picture appears. Cheaper, more frequent, more competitive, and the future of space gets brighter and more open. Pricier, rarer, more monopolized, and it narrows right back into a club. That, honestly, is the whole game, captured in 3 dials. And here's the deeper point hiding under all the dollars. We are, for the very first time, building actual infrastructure to space, a reusable road instead of a one-time stunt. And roads change absolutely everything they connect to, slowly at first and then all at once. Think about what cheap shipping did for the entire world economy, or what cheap internet did for information. Cheap, reliable access to space could be exactly that kind of shift for the next century, quietly underpinning whole industries we haven't even thought to imagine yet. But stay grounded, literally and figuratively. We are still early. The cheapest promised prices aren't fully here yet, the biggest rockets are still proving themselves, and bold timelines always slip. Be excited and be patient. Infrastructure revolutions take longer than the hype, and then they matter far more. So when the next launch lights up your feed, try to look past the flames. Ask what it actually did to the cost, the cadence, and the competition. Because that's where the real story lives, not in the spectacle, but in the slow, steady collapse of the price of leaving Earth. Because that falling price is the quiet headline of our entire era in space. Not one company, not one founder, not one rocket, but the simple, world-changing fact that getting to orbit is slowly becoming something we can almost afford to do casually. So here's the one thing to carry out of all of this. The breakthrough was never just the rocket, it was the economics. Reuse turns space from a fortune you spend once into a road you build and use again, and cheaper roads always, eventually, change the world. And the messy race to build that road, for all its billionaires, all its bluster, and all its real risk, is dragging the price of the future down for everyone. Watched carefully and kept honest, that isn't something to fear. It's something to be cautiously, clear-eyedly excited about. If this made the space economy finally click, subscribe, we're only just getting started. Next time, things get strange. Companies that want to put the AI data centers themselves into orbit. Why on earth would you do that? How would it even work, and what's the catch? See you up there.